Boy George, one of the most recognisable people in British music. A singer and songwriter, he shot to global pop fame in the 1980s as frontman with Culture Club.
Do you really want to hurt me?
Known for his soulful vocals, pioneering androgynous style and bold opinions, across a 40-year career, Boy George has topped the charts many times, both in Culture Club and as a solo artist.
I know all there is to know about the crying game.
Never far from the tabloid press, his ups and downs are well documented. But in recent years, he's been living a more stable life and once again enjoying his time in the spotlight. He's been a mentor on The Voice, received an Ivor Novello Lifetime Achievement Award, and remains a hugely popular cultural figure. In this episode of This Cultural Life, the Radio 4 programme, Boy George reveals his formative influences and experiences and speaks candidly about the prison sentence that helped turn his life around.
I knew I was never going to go back. I knew that I was going to rebuild my life when I came out and was going to change everything. You know, I definitely like who I am now, and I'm very different to the person I was 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
Take a seat. Boy George, welcome to This Cultural Life.
Thank you.
You were born George O'Dowd in 1961 and you grew up in South London in a working class Irish family. Tell me about family life. What was it like growing up?
Well, I used to think that my family were the most insane family on the planet because we had like chickens, we had like dogs, you know, we stood out and we were like the hillbillies of the road. But growing up, I just thought we were the maddest bunch ever.
Did you feel Irish growing up?
Very. I mean, my name's O'Dowd. I
Yeah.
grew up in the 70s with all the bombing and, you know, kids at school would be making comments and you were very aware of the fact that you're Irish. I used to get called O Loud. George O Loud. That was my name at school.
And what were your interests at school? In fact, what was your education like?
My education was probably spoilt by my behaviour. I wasn't a particularly compliant kid because at home, my dad ruled the roost. You know, what my dad said went. So the minute I left the house, no one was going to tell me what to do, whether it was the church or, you know, the police or the school. So I had a bad attitude towards authority and I wore it proudly.
And you say your dad ruled the roost at home. He was a tough dad.
He was a builder. I mean, he wasn't one thing, but he was definitely prone to, you know, explosions. So he went from being totally calm to being totally angry. And he was a gambler. So if he gambled and won, it was heaven. If he gambled and lost, it wasn't so heavenly. And, you know, my dad was also a brilliant man. He was handsome. He had beautiful handwriting. He could sing. He was super intelligent.
And he boxed as well.
And he boxed early on. But I think, you know, I think he felt frustrated creatively as a man. I think that, you know, what he did for a living wasn't enough, you know, because later on in his life, he was a Reiki healer. He became very esoteric later on. But in the early days, it just wasn't allowed. He didn't really know how to be a dad. He wasn't good at being a dad.
You've talked about your mum a lot in the past and how you get a lot of your creativity from her.
My mum was a great seamstress. She was just someone that could cook anything, make anything, tiling, wallpapering. My mum was just one of those people that nothing got in her way, except my dad. My dad got in her way. You know, if my mum put on a tight cardigan, she was having an affair. My mum was very stylish, beautiful clothes, but there were only very few occasions where my mum was really allowed to express who she was. And as a kid, I used to love seeing my mum in full makeup, you know, with her clothes, you know, she used to make these dresses with daisies and have matching shoes. And, you know, I just always loved her dressed up. And later on, when I started to be a bit of an exhibitionist, I think to start with, my mum was against it. And then she thought, no, he's doing what I can't do. So she kind of fully supported me. And became a sort of collaborator in a way.
Were you an outgoing kid? At what point in your childhood did you think you might want to perform for a living?
Started really when I was a kid singing at the local old people's home. I used to go and do like Roll Out the Barrel and all those Mailman's and Dustman and things like that with my girlfriends. And I wanted to be a singer. I wanted to sing. You know, I wanted to be like my heroes, you know, and I wanted to sing. And, you know, every day music was the thing that saved me really from everything.
On this programme, Boy George, I ask my guests to choose the most important influences and experiences that have inspired their own creativity. And your first choice is David Bowie. And seeing Ziggy Stardust in 1973, that incredibly landmark tour when you were, well, you would have been 11 years old, I guess.
I was just coming up to my 12th birthday. My birthday's in June, so I'm always a bit younger than everyone. So,
but that's incredibly young to have seen a Bowie show.
Yeah, I was very lucky. Lewisham Odeon was the place we went to see every band, and often we'd break in and get in for free. Someone would open the stage door or someone, you know, would let you run in. But I couldn't risk that with Bowie. It wasn't something you could risk, like not getting in. So I had a ticket. I had no bus fare to get there, no bus fare to get back. I bunked the bus to Lewisham and I walked back singing Bowie songs into an empty Coke can on the way home.
What were your impressions of the gig itself?
There was nothing like it. The lighting, the clothing, the subjects,
the theatricality.
you know, the songs. I mean, you know, as a kid, it felt like he was just totally talking to me. It felt like he totally got me, you know, we're painting our faces and dressing in thoughts from the skies. It was like, I felt like, you know, he understood who I was and where I was and what I was going to be. That album particularly, when Ziggy Stardust came out, you know, the lyrics on that, a cop knelt and kissed the feet of a priest and a queer for up at the sight of that. You know, it's like, queer? Who's saying that in a song? You know, it's something you got called in school.
Yeah.
It wasn't something people sung about. So it was just everything about him.
And were you aware of Bowie's sexuality or the stories about his sexuality at the time? Because it was never clear, was it, at the time?
Well, I think all rock stars, Mick Jagger, you know, Bowie, Mark Bolan, they were all a bit sort of blurring the sort of sexual boundaries, you know, because being rock and roll, you know, you didn't say what you were, did you? What are you into? I don't know. What am I into? You tell me. I think it was partly a sort of pose, but it was also tapping in. If you think sort of homosexuality was only legalised in the late 60s, so it was tapping into that new kind of awareness of, you know, different sexuality. And, you know, if you wanted to be cool, at that point, you embraced what was edgy and dangerous in a way, you know, and I misunderstood.
And did Bowie help validate those feelings that you had at that time?
1,000%. I mean, people say he was straight, but, you know, the thing is, it doesn't matter whether you're straight or gay. It matters whether you take the time to experiment, to be brave.
Your next choice for this programme is meeting the club promoter, Philip Salon, who was a real driving force behind the scene which was centred around the Blitz Club in Covent Garden in London in the late 1970s. When did you meet Philip?
I and my girlfriend Laura went to a punk night at the Lyceum, and because it had been all over the press, they wouldn't let us in with the ripped clothes. They said, you can't come in with those clothes on. So we were standing in the street, lost and forlorn, wondering what we were going to do with our lives. We were all dressed up with nowhere to go.
So this is what, 1976?
About 76, yeah. And we met this flamboyant guy who was walking up the road. Not Philip, someone else took us to Bangs, which was a notorious gay club on the Tottenham Court Road. And this guy just liked the look of us, took us with him to the club. And in that club was Philip Salon, dancing on a podium, lipstick and, you know, just looking absolutely fabulous. And we targeted him. I was like, that's my best friend. And I made my girlfriend follow him into the toilets to borrow his black eyeliner. And that's how we became friends. And that was it. After that, he was a big part of my life.
Did you know what he did, what his reputation was? Or you just liked the look of him?
No, I asked him if he was gay and he said, are you interested? And I was like, oh, no. I was terrified because I wasn't out then.
Oh, right.
I was still in the closet. I had a girlfriend.
Oh, when you say girlfriend, I think you
I
meant
had
a friend.
I had
who
a
was...
girlfriend. My girlfriend was called Laura. Yeah, she was my girlfriend from school, and she was gorgeous. So I'd gone out with her to this club, and then sort of met Philip, and then gradually sort of started to go to like gay clubs with Philip, and Laura got left behind. I think she went out with some boy. She went out with a straight boy. It was better for her.
What did Philip Salon offer you when you got to know him?
Excitement. Philip was the most exciting, energetic person I'd ever come across. He was absolutely as gay as you could come. He was just outrageous. He wasn't someone who pretended to be straight. He was out, and it was kind of a new thing for me to meet somebody who was so bold.
So he led you into this scene?
He led us like gladiators around London. And, there was one fantastic night with Philip, I remember so vividly, where we went to one club and we were going to another club and we got in a black taxi and he started changing in the back of the taxi. He was like literally started changing his outfit. He was just 24/7 outrageous, Philip. Like a 24-hour outrageous all the time. There was no off button.
And around this time, you were spotted by Malcolm McLaren, manager of the Sex Pistols, and he invited you to join a band, Bow Wow Wow, who actually had a couple of hits around this time. And from what I've read, you played a couple of gigs and were then sacked.
So Matthew Ashman was the guitarist who'd been in Bow Wow Wow. Malcolm had stolen Adam Ant's band and formed Bow Wow Wow. And so Matthew used to hear me sing and often said to me, "You've got a really good voice." Malcolm brought me into Bow Wow Wow because of the way I looked, and he thought it would threaten Annabella.
Who was the lead singer at the time?
Yeah, she was 15.
Yeah.
She was a young girl. So he brought in this guy that looked like a girl, to threaten her position. And I think once he sort of got what he wanted out of me, he threw me out of the band.
Were they the first gigs you ever played?
Yeah. I got pushed on stage at the Rainbow Theatre.
Big theatre?
Yeah, it was they did this big concert, Bow Wow Wow, with the fairground. It was a big event. And the audience were booing. They were like, "Why are you on? We want Annabella." But I got the taste. I was terrified. But once I was on there, I was like, "Oh, this is great. I want to do this again." And then I did another gig in Manchester at the Polytechnic in Manchester. And that was when I was fired.
Then in 1980, you formed Culture Club with Roy Hay, the guitarist and bassist Micah Craig, and drummer John Moss.
Yes.
Is there loving in your eyes all the way? If I listen to your lies, would you say I'm a man?
Did you come up with the name Culture Club?
Eventually, we were called Can't Wait Club. We were called the Caravan Club. We were called all sorts of mad things. And then eventually we worked out that we were so diverse, Jamaican, Irish, Jewish, and then, Roy being sort of a real Essex boy. So we were a real mix of cultures and sort of different types of people,
Come, a chameleon. You come and go. You come and go. Love will be easy because I like my dreams. Red, gold, and green. Red, gold, and green.
You released your debut album in October 1982, and then you had an amazingly successful hit single, Do You Really Want to Hurt Me, which went to #1. It was a big hit all around the world. But, there was a moment when you're on Top of the Pops, which, I remember very clearly. Everybody in the playground the next day was talking about this appearance. Who was the bloke that looked like a girl,
I have danced inside your eyes. How can I be real? Do you really want to hurt me?
What do you remember of that night?
Well, we only found out we were going on the night before. We got a phone call to say there's a spot available on Top of the Pops. We were at the low end of the chart, so we weren't even really eligible to be on there. We got lucky. And in my mind, I wanted to get it just right. I wanted it to be as odd and kind of beautiful as it could be. I spent a lot of time getting ready.
If it's love you want from me, then take it away. Everything's not what you
Everybody was talking about it the next day. It was in the newspapers all week. It's overnight stardom. Did you welcome that?
Well, it was interesting because actually the stuff that was written about us was actually quite derogatory and quite homophobic. It wasn't friendly. What people weren't saying, oh, wow. They were saying, what is it? Let's not let it near our kids. But I kind of didn't really get why people were so freaked out by what I was doing, but I also liked it. I liked the fact they were freaked out, but I didn't understand why they were so freaked out because I understood even then it was just clothes. It's just makeup and clothes. Why do you care?
Do You Really Want to Hurt Me, as I say, was a global hit. I think it went to number 2 in America. And that puts you on a totally different level of fame. Because, it's very rare for a band to break a British band to break America.
Especially a band like us.
Especially.
It was like, oh my God. But that's the thing, you see. I think people, I think part of the reason why we were successful in America was because we were so British.
Did you get any advice as to how to deal with the limelight and that sudden superstar level of fame?
Well, everybody thinks they're an expert on fame. Everybody thinks they know what you should do and what you shouldn't do. But basically, at the beginning, you're just thrown in front of the headlights. There's no real preparation. And when you're 20, you're not going to listen to someone giving you advice about how to be famous. You're just like, oh, shut up, You just want to get on with it. And at that point, I even discovered therapy, questioning things I did. It was just I grew up in a family where you didn't discuss your problems. You don't tell outsiders what's going on in the house, So it was really not until quite later that I was like, oh, there's another way of looking at life. Growing up, in the beginning of fame, it was a crash course. There was no one helped me at all.
The next moment that you've chosen is, I'm going to quote here, meeting Quentin Crisp with Andy Warhol, Keith Haring, Bianca Jagger and Marilyn. That sounds like some party. Where and when?
I was in New York and I got a call at the hotel from Andy Warhol's assistant saying, Andy's heard you're in town, we'd love to invite you to lunch. And they said, would you like to invite anyone? And I said, oh, I'd love to meet Quentin Crisp. And they said, we'll invite him. And he was there. And I'd just done this photo shoot with Avedon, the famous photographer. So when I sat down to lunch, I said to Quentin, he said, oh, Mr. George, what have you been doing? And I said, I just did a shoot with Avedon. And he said, all that running and chiffon, you must be so energetic. I just beat myself laughing. And he really was the life of the lunch. Quentin Crisp was, Andy was very he didn't really give a lot away. He watched more than spoke. And Quentin Crisp was just so entertaining. It was so funny and just kept telling stories and just so lovely. I loved him.
So you had requested his presence. So
Yeah.
what did he mean to you then growing up?
Well, he was a pioneer. He was a liberator. He was different to us because he apologised to who he was and we didn't. That was the only thing I didn't have in common with Quentin, but then he got away with what he could at the time. I look at all of those characters like Oscar Wilde, Quentin Crisp, Alan Turing, all the people in America, Harvey Milk, all of those people were people that allowed me to be who I was. As Quentin Crisp said, the life of homosexual is a sad one. Not for us, it was the opposite. You look at what's going on now with Drag Race and the world and how different it is. Back then, Quentin Crisp was getting arrested for just walking down the street.
Warhol was hosting this lunch then, but then just quietly observing all that was going on. What did he mean to you growing up and developing your own artistry?
You see, the thing was, I was completely impressed by Andy Warhol. I loved Andy Warhol, but I was so full of my own self-importance that I couldn't let him know. So whenever we saw him, we were just ourselves, and he didn't really get it. He didn't get that London humour. In his diaries, he insults me 4 times. Every single entry is nasty, but it's very funny. I saw it as I wasn't insulted. I was actually quite pleased that he bothered to mention me.
What did he say about you?
That, we're rude to him because he can't answer back and he's not quick enough. And that he says that Cornelia Guest, who was my best friend, she was a sort of society queen. He said she's become horrible since she's become friends with me. Like we had a bad influence. So, yeah, it's a shame I wasn't nicer to him at the time, but there you go. That's life.
You had a very well-documented struggle with drug addiction. When did you first use heroin?
It sounds so weird because I really started smoking dope first. I was smoking weed, and then I was in Paris at a fashion show, and I was looking for cocaine and somebody had heroin, and I just took that instead, which was quite insane when I think about it. But I didn't think about it at the time. It was just, I wanted to be high. And the thing about drugs is people use them because they don't want to be in their lives. They want to feel differently. They want to change the way they feel about themselves.
But it's interesting that you say you were taking drugs to escape.
Yeah.
Do you feel that you were lucky to have survived at times?
I don't think you think that about yourself because you're so in it when you're doing it that you don't sit around thinking about it. It's only when you get clean and you look back and you think, oh my God, you might see an interview where you're a little bit ski-whiffed. You think, why didn't anyone tell me? And of course they did. People often did say, what are you doing? And I was, I'm fine. So, you talk your way out of a lot. And you see it a lot with artists, where people just kind of almost like can't do anything, especially if you're an adult. You're an adult, you pay your taxes, you've got a bank account. It's very hard to stop somebody when they want to be destructive.
And I guess arguably it did get worse because in 2009 you were sentenced to 15 months in prison.
The singer Boy George has been jailed for 15 months. He was convicted last year of falsely imprisoning a man at his flat in East London. The court was told he attacked his victim, handcuffed him and hit him with a chain. I know
you served 4 months and that was for assault and false imprisonment. How did you cope?
Read the book, actually, because I think I explain it, because I think that such a tabloid, it's such a tabloid way of explaining it. And I think in the book, I finally make sense of what actually happened and
of what you were convicted of.
What I was convicted of is assault, but actually the assault was handcuffing. It wasn't beating anyone up, and I make it really clear in my book. And it was 17 years ago. I paid for my crime. I went to prison. That's the worst thing that can ever happen to anyone, to have your freedom taken away from you. It's, if you want to live in a civilized society, you have to accept the way it runs. And I've been through the mill and I've paid.
How were you treated in prison?
Brilliantly. I mean, obviously, when I went in there, I didn't know what I was going to find, But what I did discover is that who you are outside is who you are inside, and weirdly, people wanted to meet me and they wanted to, they just wanted to meet me. They were kind of fascinated by me.
You say you coped brilliantly in there.
Yeah.
I mean, how did you cope on a day-to-day basis?
I remember my brothers coming to see me on a visit when I first got my first visit, and I remember thinking, I'm so glad it's me and not you three, because they would never have coped.
Really?
No way. Because I think, I got clean a year before I went to prison. So I had a spiritual program, and I was able to rationalize where I was in my life. I was able to say, this is because of something I did in the past. It's not who I am now. So I knew I was never going to go back. I knew that I was going to rebuild my life when I came out and was going to change everything. I definitely like who I am now, and I'm very different to the person I was 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
And you're still writing and still recording. I mean, you've released 9 solo albums on top of the 6 that you recorded.
I've released 52 tracks in the last 2 years on Spotify. I've released stuff all the time.
I know, I was going to say, but you're very prolific at releasing exactly those individual tracks. So looking back as a songwriter, which is your primary occupation, is there a single song that you are most proud of?
Haven't written it yet.
Really?
There's a few songs already online that I love and think are some of my best work. A song I wrote about Liberace called How to Be a Chandelier. That's probably one of my favourite things I've ever written. Basically, I mean, the industry that I was in doesn't exist, so there's no rules anymore. I don't see why anyone waits around to make a record. It seems so ridiculous. It's so easy to make records.
Is that liberating then?
Well, when you see the people say, oh, they waited 20 years to make an album, why? Why? Like 20 minutes. It's like songwriting is easy. Songwriting is easy. Getting it played is not easy, because you hear all the same things. But as a writer, you're not trying to write another Karma Chameleon. I've got no interest in writing Karma Chameleon. I want something much better than that. So I think I'm in an industry that tries to suppress your creativity, and you always want to get better at what you're doing. And I really do think that the way I perform now as an artist is night and day different to what I did in the 80s. I was uncomfortable. I didn't know what I was doing. I was insecure. And now I'm actually engaged with the audience. There's no fear.
Well, I was going to say, what drives you on creatively?
Well, what I'm doing now is what keeps me excited. I mean, I'm not particularly interested in the past because the past doesn't exist. So when people talk to me about the past, I'm like, doesn't exist. I understand what they're doing, but I think it's unhealthy to keep living in over what you did when there's so much more to do now. So I would say I'm a now person. I mean, I respect the past and I have to talk about it a lot and it doesn't bother me so much, but now is everything, kids. Move on.
Boy George, George O'Dowd, thank you for sharing your cultural life with us.
That was a really good interview. Thank you.
Thanks.
They're rare. They are rare. I'm telling you, it's really rare to talk to people that actually go, actually, I really enjoyed that. Thank you.